So one thing that really helped me as a student in general chemistry was keeping in mind some sort of guiding principles that can help me predict and problem solve, especially in a field that's dominated by, reactions, reactions, reactions. And I think it's overwhelming at times to see a given reaction and not necessarily know exactly what the components are, especially if it's this big organic or inorganic reaction that has so many different components, really, really big molecules. It's hard, it's difficult. But there are a few things that you can keep in mind to be able to navigate through some of those harder problems. One of those things to me was Le Chatelier's principle. It helps you think about what's going on within a system at a given time, really. And it's because it states that with a stressor or some sort of disturbance or interference in a system, that system is always going to do what it can to try and reestablish that prior equilibrium. And that relates to so many different things in different contexts. It can relate to changes in concentration. It relates to changes in pressure or volume or temperature. One thing that I like to think about is like a blood buffering system. And that really helps to make sure that your blood is always maintained at a specific pH so that you don't get into a situation where your body is either too acidic, has blood that's too acidic, or blood that's too alkaline, is too basic. It's really, really, really important. So there's this reaction. It's CO2 plus H2O yields H2CO3 yields H plus HCO3 minus. Again, this is a lot to deal with, especially if it is general chemistry and you don't necessarily know what components to work with first. But it helps to think about exactly what the system is doing, and it helps to know what a buffering system is. So when your blood gets too acidic, there are mechanisms in place to make sure that you can maintain that equilibrium. So, if you're exercising and your blood is becoming too acidic, what you can do is your body starts breathing really heavily. You start taking in a lot of oxygen, and the purpose of that is that as you're taking in all of this oxygen, you're also blowing off so much carbon dioxide. And again, one of the biggest things when you're exercising is your blood starts to get a bit acidic. When you're blowing off the CO2, if you think about the blood buffering system, it means that if you're having less CO2 in the blood, less CO2 in the body, that reaction, that system is going to work to create more CO2. It's going to shift the reaction from products to reactants. The products of this mechanism specifically are H+, which is acidic, it's a proton, and HCO3-. But what it does now is that if you're blowing off CO2, it means that that reaction is going to go back to its reactants, start generating more CO2, and reduce the amount of H+ protons, acidic protons in your blood. That's really, really important because it allows your blood to buffer around a state that's not too acidic. It's very important. But there's a flip side to that. If you're also constantly inhaling, you're hyperventilating, that can also be really bad because it can make your blood too alkaline. So one thing I like to think about is like when you're on an airplane and maybe you've seen someone in a movie or maybe you've been in a situation where you're hyperventilating, that can actually be really bad for your body too because your blood can become too alkaline. So actually what you can do is hyperventilate into a bag because whatever you're blowing off into that bag is now being inhaled back into your body, and it'll contribute again to that system of equilibrium where you can then increase the acidity of your blood because you're ingesting a lot of the reactants and shifting that mechanism towards the right, which is again those H+ ions, HCO3-. These are all really, really important things to consider, and I really like this guiding principle because I can think about it in a bunch of different ways that apply to some of the experiences that I have or some of the experiences that we have as humans, right? And I really hope that helps in trying to problem solve and predict your way through some of these complicated reactions. It helps a lot to have a couple guiding principles in your toolkit for sure.